name of your Lord,
Hi,
who has created
this
all
is
that exists,
part
has created
4,
man
I
from
believe,
cloud
of
and
Oh
reed,
That Mo,
and your Lord is the
a
most
video
generous.
series that I'm
Another early
taking off of the
report
net,
says here Muhammad was being
but since
strangled
it's
so
not going to be as
hard
good
he
as
felt
the
like he
original,
was going
I'm
to
providing the
die.
link so you can go on to it. It's not called Oh That Mo in YouTube, it's called something else, but you'll see it when you click on that to see the better version.
We know that after his experience in the cave, he became suicidal, tried to hurl himself off a cliff. We know that it was his wife Khadija and her cousin Waraka who persuaded
Ali and side with him against Muhammad's other companions who fought him, while the Sunnis hate the Shiites for doing so.
One of the biggest problems for Muslims is the spiritual reliability of Muhammad. Some of the descriptions of Muhammad receiving revelation sound like something straight out of The Exorcist. Apart from that, there are a number of details in the Muslim sources that seriously call into question Muhammad's spiritual reliability.
When Muhammad was young, his foster mother thought he was demon-possessed, since two beings threw him to the ground, and he was found with a livid face. Moreover, Muhammad's first alleged revelational experience with the being that would come to be viewed as Gabriel was actually demonic. In Sahih Bukhari, we read about this early encounter in the cave of Hira between Muhammad and this being, quote, "The Prophet added, 'The angel caught me forcefully and pressed me so hard that I could not bear it any more. Then he released me and again asked me to read, and I replied, I do not know how to read. Thereupon he caught me again and pressed me a second time till I could not bear it any more. Then he released me again and asked me to read, but again I replied, I do not know how to read, or what shall I read? Thereupon he caught me for the third time and pressed me, and then released me and said, Read in the name of your Lord, who has created all that exists, has created man from a clot, read, and your Lord is the most generous." Another early report says here Muhammad was being strangled so hard he felt like he was going to die.
We know from Muslim records that when Muhammad began receiving revelations, his first impression was that he was demon-possessed. We know that after his experience in the cave, he became suicidal, tried to hurl himself off a cliff. We know that it was his wife Khadija and her cousin Waraka who persuaded him that he wasn't possessed, he was a prophet of God. Now, what happened to Muhammad in the cave when the Quran started coming to him? I don't know. But I know this, when he ran out of that cave, terrified, depressed, and suicidal, he was convinced that he had seen a demon, and that's a problem.
Initially, Muhammad's wife's cousin Waraka correctly believed Muhammad was demon-possessed. After Muhammad's wife Khadija explained to Waraka what was happening with Muhammad after his first encounter with the being who would come to be seen as Gabriel, Waraka had a very interesting perspective, quote, Waraka expressed surprise and said Jibreel only came to prophets, the best of creatures, so he wished to meet the prophet. He said that sometimes the devil deceives people pretending to be Jibreel, and then he to whom the devil goes turns mad, unquote. This is correct, as 2 Corinthians 11:14 says, and no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. Muhammad's revelations were clearly demonic possessions. During his alleged revelations, Muhammad would hear ringing in his ears and sweat profusely. He would turn red and breathe heavily. He would be choked. He would move his lips quickly. He would hear voices thinking trees and rocks were speaking to him. He would fall to his knees with trembling shoulders. He would feel dread and terror. He would have a racing heart with swollen veins on his shoulders and neck. He would have a severe fever. This is consistent with demonic possession, and it's inconsistent with what is documented about the experiences of previous prophets who received actual revelations from God.
And there are other problems. Think about the satanic verses, the verses that Muhammad delivered to his followers and later claimed were from Satan. When Muhammad, this is how the story goes, when Muhammad was preaching in Mecca, he didn't win very many converts, but he wanted his countrymen to accept Islam, and he was hoping to receive a revelation that would help them. And then one day, of course, he got the revelation he was looking for. It said, "Have you not heard of Alat and Alusa and Manat, the third, the other? These are the exalted cranes whose intercession is to be hoped for. So there are these three goddesses that are like birds. They're exalted cranes who can carry your prayers to Allah. This was originally part of Surah 53 of the Quran. Muhammad delivered these verses to his followers. He bowed down in honor of them, and his followers bowed down with him. But a little while later, Muhammad told his followers that these verses, which he had delivered as part of the Quran, weren't really from God, they were from Satan. And he replaced them with the words that we find in the Quran today. So when you read Surah 53, keep in mind the fact that it originally promoted polytheism and that Muhammad couldn't tell the difference between a revelation from God and a revelation from Satan. It's also interesting to note that at one point late in life, Muhammad was a victim of a magic spell, according to him, not according to me. Several passages in Bukhari report that someone stole a hairbrush from Muhammad and used it to cast a spell on him. Ibn Asaq tells us that Muhammad was bewitched during this time, and Bukhari adds that the spell made him delusional. So according to Muslim sources, God's greatest prophet was under a spell for, let's say, a year, and that's a problem.
In Quran 69:44-46, Muhammad stated if he fabricated false teachings, i.e. invented revelations not from God, then he would have his aorta cut, it says. And if he had fabricated against us some of the sayings, we would certainly have seized him by the right hand, then we would certainly have cut off his aorta. Well, it just so happens that the Muslim sources tell us Muhammad was poisoned by a Jewish person and then reported that it caused him to feel as if his aorta was being cut. Quote, narrated Aisha, the Prophet in his ailment in which he died used to say, "O Aisha, I still feel the pain caused by the food I ate at Kabar, and at this time I feel as if my aorta is being cut from that poison."
And so we look at the historical records and we find that Muhammad originally thought he was demon-possessed. He became suicidal when he started receiving his revelations. He delivered verses from Satan, and people could cast spells on it. And a lot of Muslims don't know anything about this, but even if you point it out, they say, it's no big deal. But I look at it and say, maybe there's something wrong here.
According to Islam, the Quran is infallible. That is, it is free from error. Moreover, Islam teaches Muhammad's sunnah, that is, his sayings and deeds in the hadith literature, are to be followed by Muslims. This presupposes they are accurate and thus worthy to be followed. For example, Muhammad said, "Keep to my sunnah." And there are many references in the Quran ordering Muslims to obey and emulate Muhammad's teaching and example. Thus, if there are historical, scientific, logical, and prophetic errors in the Quran and authentic hadith material, this proves Muhammad was a false prophet and that Islam is false.
The Quran is chock full of errors, whether logical or historical, scientific, mathematical. You name the category, the Quran probably has an error that would fit into it. An example of a logical contradiction appears when you compare for example, a handful of verses in the Quran, such as Surah 2, verse 221, where we are told that Muslims cannot marry idolaters and unbelievers. If we compare that to Surah 5:5, where we're told that Muslim men can marry Christian women, we may infer from that Christian women are not idolaters and unbelievers. That is, if Muslims cannot marry idolaters, and they can marry Christians, then Christians, as a matter of deductive certainty, can't be idolaters. However, according to Surah 9, verses 28 through 33, Christians are idolaters and unbelievers, so the Quran contradicts itself.
Muhammad believed the reason the sun appears to move in the sky is because of the sun's movement and not the earth's rotation. In Quran 36:38 we read, "And the sun runs his course for a period determined for him. That is the decree of him, the exalted in might, the all-knowing." Unquote. In the hadith literature, Muhammad explains this verse, leaving no doubt this is what he believed. In Sahih Bukhari we read, narrated Abu Dar, "The Prophet asked me at sunset, 'Do you know where the sun goes at the time of sunset?' I replied, Allah and his apostle know better. He said, it goes, i.e. travels, till it prostrates itself underneath the throne and takes the permission to rise again. And it is permitted.
If you want to
And then
see
a
part
time will
5,
come, it
I'll
will be
provide
allowed to
it.
prostrate itself, but its prostration will not be accepted.
And
it will
if
ask
it's a
permission
lousy
to go on its
version, I'll
course,
provide the link so you
but
can
will
see
not
the
be
original.
permitted. But it will be
All
ordered to
these
return whence it has
videos
come,
are supposed to be
and
like
so
10
it will
minutes long
rise
at
in
the
west.
most, actually a
And
little
that
bit
is the
longer.
interpretation of the
And
statement
so
of
you can
Allah,
just
and the sun
count
runs
to where you
its
want to go to
course
see
for a
it.
term decreed.
So
Hence, it is clear Muhammad
video
believed the
5
reason
would
it
be
looks
like
the
50
sun
minutes
is moving
into
in
it.
the sky
Yeah.
is because of its movement
so
and not the Earth's rotation around
Part
the sun. as
5
science
for
proves.
Oh That Mo coming
This
up.
is a clear scientific error.